You're listening to WHAINT Radio, 91.5 on the dial, and this is the Midnight Holler. Hey there, friends. Been quieter around the station since our last broadcast. I haven't heard much moving across the roof lately. No claws dragging over the metal. No heavy footsteps stopping directly above the studio. No eggs cracking open in the rain gutters. That ought to make me feel better. It doesn't. Whatever was up there might have left. Or it might have learned how to be still. Either way, I haven't gone back outside to check. Don't intend to either. Some mysteries earn an investigation. Others, I don't have to tell you, earn a locked door. I did make a mistake a few nights ago. Fell asleep longer than I meant to. That happens sometimes. There ain't a sunrise here to tell the body when it's overstayed its welcome, and the clocks around this place have never been reliable enough to argue with. When I woke up, every light in the station had gone out. Every light except one. The little desk lamp beside the microphone. It was glowing just bright enough for me to see my own reflection in the studio window. And something standing behind it. Outside. It was tall enough that its shoulders rose above the top of the glass, too thin through the middle. Arms hanging nearly to its knees. Its head looked wrong, drawn forward and narrow, with something branching above it that might have been bone or antler or bare limbs caught in the dark. I couldn't see its eyes at first. Then it leaned closer, and I realized I could. They weren't reflecting the desk lamp. There wasn't enough light for that. They were just visible, pale and deep set, fixed on me like they'd been watching long before I woke up. I didn't move. Neither did it. Then the station lights came back all at once, and the window was empty. I haven't slept since. Not properly. There's been trouble coming through the broadcast, too. Little disturbances beneath the signal. Sometimes it sounds like another voice buried behind mine. Sometimes it's a low pulse repeating in the same pattern. I've recorded it, slowed it down, listened to it 100 times. I still can't understand the message, but I'm beginning to think it isn't meant for the listeners. I think it's meant for me. You hear that? That sound? It's been coming from the basement. Some nights it's scratching. And once or twice, I could have sworn I heard someone ringing a small bell down there. Every part of me knows I need to go downstairs. I feel it when I pass the basement door, that whatever is waiting below has something to do with Mary Ann. Maybe her voice, maybe the tapes, maybe something wearing the parts of her I remember. That's why I haven't gone, because wanting to hear someone again can make a man stupid, and grief has a way of opening doors that sense would have kept locked. Tonight's story begins in Louisiana. This one came to me on an old record. Something old, dusty, and ancient. I had some difficulty figuring out how to play it back, but I think I got it figured out. You ready for this, folks? This story came all the way back from 1888, during the era of telegraphs and stagecoaches. Yeah, I was surprised too. This is the actual account given by a circuit preacher, Louisiana man, or Louisiana bound, out to do what he figured was the Lord's plain work. Swap the old cracked bells hanging in country chapels for new ones, bought and paid for by a benefactor up north who liked the idea of his money ringing out over swampland he'd never set foot in. Every church on his route took the new bell gladly, except one. Bellerose Hollow. The people there had one cracked bell hanging above a chapel built on a ridge deep in the basin. They knew it would eventually break. They also knew it could never be replaced, because that bell wasn't calling people to worship. It was reminding something beneath the church that it was still supposed to be asleep. This is the account of Reverend Amos Pruitt. This is The Last Bell of Bellerose Hollow. See you on the other side of the static.
I write from the last church on my circuit, and confess more relief in reaching it than a servant of God ought properly admit to paper, though I suppose you have had circuit men write you worse. 6 months now I have hauled Mr. Whitfield's bells south and west in the bed of my wagon, canvas and oilcloth over the lot of them, and in that time I have watched a great many old bells come down, split at the lip, eaten green by weather, cracked clean through the crown, ropes gone dark and smooth from 3 generations of hands pulling on them. There is a particular sound an old bell makes coming down out of its tower. You see, it doesn't ring, it sighs more like. One long breath of bronze, as though something were finally setting down a weight it had carried past all reasonable use. I had grown rather fond of that sound, actually. Took it for the noise of a burden gladly surrendered. I no longer think so. Bellerose Hollow sits farther into the basin than any other settlement marked on the map given me at Verdun. The corduroy road began honestly enough, narrow and rutted but honest and true, and then it ran straight into a stand of cypress that seemed so old and close-grown that the afternoon sun simply went out above me, the way a lamp goes out when you have forgotten to trim the wick. Black water stood on either side of that road the whole way through. Spanish moss hung low enough in places to drag across the canvas as I passed beneath it. You may remember Mercy, my horse. She's a steadier animal than most men I have traveled with, and even she took a dislike to the place almost at once, which is unusual in her. She has weathered lightning, gunfire, the temper of an aggrieved sow, without so much as a flattened ear to show for it. My father used to say a horse could know a man's intentions before the man himself had settled on them. I laughed at that when he first told me so, being perhaps 11 or 12, and still of the opinion that a boy's knowing was the better kind. He laughed too, and told me I would stop after I had buried my first good horse. I have not yet had occasion to prove him right, God willing, but I thought of his words more than once upon that road. Twice, Mercy stopped dead in the traces, hard enough that the wagon struck up against her harness. Both times, her ears went back towards the trees on our right hand. Both times, I saw something move at the very edge of my lantern light. I cannot really give you an accurate description of it. I have tried, sitting here, tried to find better words than those I first put down, but I just cannot. It stayed low and long enough that I took it at first for a fallen limb sliding through the brush of its own accord, which I know is a foolish thing to write down, and I also know, equally well, it's the truest account that I can give you. But it crossed beneath the hanging moss without disturbing a strand of it, and I heard no footfall. I saw no eyeshine. A wild dog, I thought, or perhaps a deer glimpsed poorly. You know that the basin plays no end of tricks upon a tired man's eyesight, and I have been on that road since well before dawn. Even so, Mercy would not settle until I took her by the bridle myself and led her forwards. talking low to her the whole way, as though I were the calm one and not her. The town came upon me with almost no warning. Swamp, and then more swamp. And then, all at once, the road climbed onto a narrow ridge holding perhaps 20 homes, a general store, a mill standing idle, and a whitewashed chapel whose modest tower rose no higher than the cypress ringing it round. The people were about their ordinary business when I came up. A woman beating dust from a rug over a porch rail, 2 boys chasing a hoop down the road, an old man mending a fence post, and a yellow dog dozing at his feet in the shade. Somewhere off, somebody was boiling cane syrup. That sweetness carried clean across the whole ridge. And after that close, rotting road, it felt to me almost like being back into the world, back at home. And then the children saw my wagon. The hoop went over and rolled off. The hoop went over and rolled off, as if forgotten. The woman with the rug stood dead still, both hands pressed flat against the fabric. The old man at the fence straightened slowly, the way a man does when his back pains him, but he means to stand regardless. Not one of them looked at me. Every eye on that ridge went instead to the shape beneath the oilcloth in my wagon bed. I called out a greeting to all of them and got nods for my trouble. They were not unkind, but seemed cautious, careful, though no one came near enough to shake my hand. The chapel sits close by the ridge's center, Gable's Chapel, named for Josiah Gable, who led the founding families into this basin nearly 70 years past. The building itself, I have to say, is unremarkable. Cypress timber set upon low stone piers, walls patched often and with evident care, the front steps leaning a touch to the east, windows glazed in old uneven glass that bends whatever you look at through it, the way old glass will. But the bell is another matter. It seems to be older than the church that is housing it. I'd put my professional judgment behind that claim without any hesitation. The bronze has gone the color of a drowned penny, mottled through with green-black corrosion, and a crack rises from the lower lip, 3 inches, no more at present, though feathered along its edge in a manner that speaks to me of a deeper rot within the casting itself. Strangely enough, when I laid my palm against it, it felt cold. Not the coolness one expects of shade, mind you. This cold found the joints of my fingers directly and settled there, and refused to leave even after I had drawn my hand away. That tower stood hot as an oven around me the whole while. Sweat ran beneath my collar for the entire climb. Yet the bronze felt as though it had spent the day submerged in January water, which I set down here only because I do not know what else to make of it. I drew my hand back and found a gray residue across the palm. When I wiped it upon my handkerchief, it left 4 long marks close together, not unlike fingers. I told myself at the time it was only tarnish, and I still mostly believe that. Another strange coincidence, if you will. Probably nothing more, but when I looked at the bell's face, I swear I saw a face within it. Nothing carved, only the chance arrangement of pitting and corrosion, the same idle trick the eye plays with clouds, I guess, with knots in old wood or with the grain of a plank left too long in the weather. A hollow where an eye might sit, a mouth that was slightly dragged open, as though caught part way through a word. I leaned nearer to be certain, and the face was gone. "You best not do that," said a man behind me, and I confess it startled me more than I should like to admit for a man of my calling. The old man from the fence had come up to the tower stair without my hearing him. Silas Verrett, I would learn, keeper of the chapel grounds and, near as I can tell, the closest thing this town possesses to an unofficial authority over it. He was near 70, lean as a stripped branch, iron-gray hair, hands thickened by a lifetime's labor. His right hand carried an old scar where part of the index finger ought to have been. He had climbed the tower slowly, though not from weakness. He moved with the practiced care of a man who had spent many years expecting bad news and no longer saw any benefit in hurrying towards it. I asked him what he had meant, and he was looking at the bell, but not at me. "Best not study it too close." "On account of the corrosion?" "On account of it studies you back." I took this for the local flavor of humor and smiled at him, but he did not smile back. I have thought of that more than once since. I gave him my name, explained Mr. Whitfield's gift to the diocese, and showed him my letter of authorization. He read it slowly, his lips moving faintly over the harder words, before folding it along the crease and handing it back without comment of any kind. "You'll want to turn that wagon around, Reverend." I told him the bell was cracked. "So it is." "Well, it may fail." "So it may." "Mr. Silas, a piece of bronze that size could kill a man standing beneath it when it does." At that, his eyes came up to meet mine at last, pale gray, both of them. I have seen that particular gray before in men that had come home from war. "That bell's held longer than you've been drawing breath," he said. "It'll hold a while yet." "That is not an assurance I'm able to accept, Mr. Verrett." "No," he agreed, easy enough. "I expect it ain't." I asked whether there might be some sentimental attachment to the old bell as a piece of the town's history. I could arrange for its preservation once it came down, I told him, if that would ease the matter any. He only looked towards the new bell riding beneath canvas in my wagon. "Take that one on to Bayou Crevette instead. Tower stood empty since the hurricane took theirs. They'd thank you kindly for it." "My instructions name Gable's Chapel specifically, Mr. Verrett." "Then your instructions were written by somebody who had never slept here." He started down the chapel steps, and I followed after, my letter still in hand. "If there is some practical objection to the exchange, sir, I would be obliged if you would state it to me plain." He stopped at the foot of the steps. Whatever hostility had been there a moment before went out of his face all at once, and what remained looked at me like plain exhaustion. Not the ordinary fatigue of age or labor, mind you. It was the look of a man who had kept watch over something for so long that he could no longer remember what it felt like to believe another person might relieve him. "If that bell stops," he said, "they'll wake." "Who will wake?" He looked past my shoulder and towards the houses. The woman with the rug had already gone inside. The boys in their hoop had vanished entirely. I had not even seen them leave. Even the yellow dog had risen and crept beneath the porch boards. And for a moment there was no sound upon the ridge but the canvas shifting faintly over the bell in my wagon. Silas seemed to listen to it, or perhaps to something beneath it. "You're welcome to ask around," he said, and then he went inside and shut the door softly behind him. I stood there a while longer than I care to admit, looking at that door. A widow has taken me in for the length of my stay, Mrs. Ariel Trosclair, who keeps a room above her kitchen and has offered it in trade for whatever small labor I can provide while I remain there. She is perhaps 60, broad in the shoulders, gray hair worn in a bun. She has the settled manner of a woman who has spent her whole life solving trouble before other people have finished naming it. She fed me chicken stew and cornbread and coffee dark enough to leave a stain in the cup. When I told her of my difficulty with Mr. Verrett, she heard the whole account without once interrupting me, which I confess is a quality that I appreciate greatly, someone that is better at listening than just speaking their mind. "Old Silas just doesn't take to strangers who like changing things," she said when I had finished. "I meant him no offense by any of it. It ain't offense he's guarding against." "What is it then, if not that?" She had already risen and started towards the wash basin with our plates. She answered with her back turned. "That church has stood the way it stands since my own grandmother was a girl on this ridge. No cause fixing what the Lord himself ain't seen fit to complain of." I pointed out, as gently as I knew how, that the Lord had not engineered the bell himself, that the weakness in its casting remained a plain fact regardless of any divine opinion on the subject. She turned and looked at me over her shoulder. There was no anger in her face. It was pity, plain and simple, the kind one gives a man who has said something foolish without yet knowing it. I asked how long the bell had been cracked. "Long as I've known it. And before that, long as my mother knew it." "That is no measure of its present condition." "No," she said. "I expect it ain't." It was near enough the same answer Verrett had given me, and in nearly the same tone. Not dismissal, but more like they just resigned from the topic altogether. I asked whether the townspeople believed the bell served some purpose beyond calling them to worship. At that, She turned back towards the basin and set one plate down more carefully than the task required. People believe all sorts of things when they've lived in one place long enough. But that's not an answer, Mrs. It's the only one you're likely to get tonight. So I let the matter rest. Later, with dusk coming down softly over the ridge, I walked back to the chapel alone. I meant only to look the tower over once more before full dark, and satisfy myself that no immediate failure was likely before I could bring the matter before the church council. The western windows still held the last color of day. They threw it back into the nave in long bands of amber and black through that warped old glass. And then I saw a figure standing within. This figure, it was too tall to be Verrett. Its upper portion reached nearly to the rafters. It stood in the center aisle, facing the window, though I could make out no proper head upon it, no shoulders, no clean division between one part of its body and the other. Only a dark interruption where the empty church ought to have shone plain through. I remained outside longer than I should have. The figure did not move, so neither did I. At length, I climbed the steps and let myself in, just to discover that the chapel was empty. Not a soul within, not a shadow out of place that I could find. I walked the full length of the nave twice and examined the spaces beneath the pews, the narrow room behind the pulpit, and the stair leading up into the tower. Nothing. The air inside smelled of old timber, dust, and the faint mineral odor of the bell above. I stood beneath the rope and listened. At first, I heard only the evening insects beyond the walls and the quiet settling of boards beneath my own weight. Then, from somewhere overhead, came the smallest sound. Not a ring. Something closer to a breath drawn carefully through closed teeth. I looked up. The rope hung still. I told myself it was wind moving through the crack in the bronze, though no wind touched my face below, and the evening outside had gone still enough that the moss upon the trees no longer stirred. When I stepped back onto the grass, the figure had gone from the window. Just a trick of uneven panes and dying light. I'm nearly certain of it. I set that down and will probably hold on to it, though I notice I have now written the phrase nearly certain twice in one evening's letter, which is not a thing I'm accustomed to writing at all. Mrs. Trosclair had left a lamp burning for me when I returned. She sat at the kitchen table mending the cuff of a man's shirt, though I have seen no husband about the house and did not ask whose it had been. "You went back," she said. "Yes, I wished to inspect the chapel before dark." "And did you?" "Well, yes, I found nothing requiring immediate action." Her needle stopped halfway through the cloth. "That ain't what I asked, Reverend." I told her I had seen a shape through the western window and found the chapel empty upon entering it. She lowered the shirt into her lap. "Did it see you?" "I cannot imagine how a shadow might see anything." "Did it?" There was no mockery in her voice. I said that I did not know. She nodded once, as if this were an answer she had expected, and then resumed her sewing. I asked whether others had reported seeing figures in the windows. People here know better than to study those panes once the light starts going. Mr. Verrett used nearly the same words regarding the bell. Silas has had cause. What cause? She drew the thread tight between her fingers. You keep asking a thing long enough, Reverend. Sometimes it'll start answering you back. I told her that a Christian man cannot be governed by fearful sayings and half-told stories, particularly where the physical safety of a congregation is concerned. No, she said, I suppose he can't. It's been a long night. I've been thinking tonight of my mother. Strange, isn't it? Strange what travel stirs loose in a man's mind. I had not called this particular memory up in years, yet it returned to me complete when I sat beneath Mrs. Trosclair's lamp, down to the color of the morning and the smell of that river. I was perhaps 8 or maybe 9. We stood together beside the Ouachita, while a ferry moved through heavy fog. Somewhere beyond the mist, too far off for us to see the church itself, a bell marked the hour. My mother went quiet when she heard it. I asked what troubled her. She put one hand upon my shoulder and listened until the final note had gone. "Sound always travels farther than the thing that made it," she said. I laughed, because it sounded to me like one of those sayings mothers invent simply to appear wiser than their sons, and she laughed as well. I wish now that I had asked what she meant by that. It may have meant nothing, likely it did, but still, I find myself listening tonight. The room Mrs. Trosclair has given me overlooks the chapel. From the washstand window, I can see the upper part of the tower above the roofs, though the bell itself is hidden from view. The ridge has gone quiet. No voices between the houses, no wagon wheels, no dogs barking beneath the porches. Even the insects seem to have drawn further back into the swamp. A few minutes ago, I thought I heard someone cross the yard beneath my window. The steps came slowly from the direction of the road, passed beneath me, and stopped beside the house. I waited for a knock. None came. When I looked down, no one stood in the yard. There was only my own reflection in the old glass, laid faintly over the darkness outside. For a moment, I had the impression that it was listening too. I am tired past the point of good judgment tonight, obviously. Tomorrow, I will speak plainly to the church council and have this settled one way or the other. Your servant in Christ, Amos Pruitt. Letter 2, September the 10th, 1888. To the board. I must set down what occurred last night before the passage of even a single day allows me to talk myself into calling it ordinary, which I confess I have already half begun to do. Mrs. Trosclair's guest room looks out over the chapel ridge. It is small, plain, and pleasant enough by daylight. An iron bed, a washstand, and a window whose swollen frame will not shut entirely, no matter how a man puts his weight against it. The heat kept sleep from me a long while. Near midnight, I heard footsteps below and thought little of them, Mrs. Trosclair keeping late hours as she does. Then I noticed a light moving inside the chapel. Not in the nave, mind you, but in the bell tower. I went to the window. The tower appeared empty from where I stood, and yet a pale glow shifted behind the louvers, slow and circling, the way a lantern moves in the hand of someone walking a wide loop around whatever it is they are carrying it past. I watched for perhaps a minute. The light completed the same passage 3 times. Each circuit took precisely as long as the one before it, or near enough that I found myself counting the intervals without meaning to. Then the bell rang. 1 stroke. Clean. The sound moved out through the hollow of the night, and seemed to settle down into the swamp rather than rise towards the sky, the way a bell's note properly ought to travel. The sound did not decay as it should have, thinning evenly, top to bottom, the way any bell's note thins until it's simply gone. Instead, it narrowed to the barest edge of itself, and then it bent downwards. A second tone emerged beneath the first, far too low to have come from that same bronze at all. It's almost distorted sounding, wrong. I felt it more than heard it, passing through the window frame and into my hand where it rested upon the sill. It answered the bell. I do not mean necessarily an echo. An echo repeats only what it's given. This seemed to be a response. I checked my pocket watch by the window light. 11 minutes past midnight, near enough as I could make out. Every dog upon that ridge began barking at once, as though a single hand had struck the whole lot of them together. From beneath porches, behind fences, and somewhere farther down near the mill, they all gave voice in that same instant. Then the low answering note passed out of the air. Every dog went silent with it. The sudden absence of sound was so complete that I became aware of my own breathing and, for a moment, could not rid myself of the impression that something beyond the window was listening to it. I dressed and crossed the yard with my lantern. The chapel door stood locked. I worked the latch with my pocket knife, a habit acquired through long practice on this circuit, doors sticking or locking against me more often than one might suppose, and then I let myself inside. The rope hung coiled at the foot of the belfry stair. I laid my hand upon it. It was warm as a living wrist. The chapel surrounding it had grown cold enough that my breath showed faintly in the lantern light. This struck me as backwards and troubled me more than the warmth of the rope itself, strange as that is to admit. I kept my hand there perhaps a second longer than good sense required. Something seemed to have moved beneath the fibers. Only the settling of the rope beneath my grip, I expect. Even now, I cannot offer you a better explanation. But I climbed the belfry, and then found no one there. The bell hung still. I examined the wheel, the yoke, and every length of line available to me. There was no clockwork that I could find, no counterweight, no second rope by which the thing might have been rung by any hand except one standing directly beneath it. Yet no one stood there. The crack along the lip appeared no worse than it had that afternoon. I was still turning it over in my lantern light when movement below caught my eye. Something crossed the nave. I saw it through the gaps in the belfry floor, a darkness passing low between the pews, unhurried. "Mr. Verrett?" No answer. I listened closely. For several seconds, I heard only the soft flame of my lantern and the steady ticking of my watch inside my coat. Then came the faintest sound from below. Wood, giving beneath weight. One board, and then another. So I went down. The church stood empty. The front door remained open where I had left it, and my second lantern still burned by the pulpit, undisturbed. I walked between the pews, expecting at any moment to find Verrett crouched there or some animal trapped beneath a bench. But I found nothing. The western window threw back the nave behind me. In that reflected glass, someone sat in the last pew. They were bent forwards, elbows resting upon his knees. His head was lowered as though in prayer. I confess, my first thought, foolish as it sounds now, was only that I ought to not disturb a man at his devotions. Then I remembered that I had walked past that pew twice. I turned to look directly, and it stood empty. I looked back towards the glass, and it showed only myself and nothing more. I remained there for a while, experiencing the particular sort of foolishness a man feels when he has frightened himself over nothing, except that I did not, even then, quite believe it had been nothing. You see, there are moments when a man's reason tells him one thing and the older part of him, the part that knew darkness before it knew language even, tells him another thing. I left the chapel directly after. Crossing the yard, I glanced toward my own window out of habit more than intention and found a man standing behind it. His outline showed plainly against the dark of the room. Narrow shoulders, a bowed head. One hand laid flat against the glass. I knew him for a man at once because he wore my own coat, the very coat I had left hanging across the footboard. I stood rooted in the yard, unable to make my legs carry me forwards or backwards. The figure did not move at first, and then it raised its head. I could not make out the face. My lantern threw its flame back at precisely the wrong angle across the pane and hid it from me, which I have wondered about since, whether that was just chance or something else entirely. But its hand remained against the glass. After a moment, the fingers spread. I could not see them clearly enough to count. At that moment, I ran up the stairs, and the room stood empty. My coat hung across the footboard, exactly where I had left it. I searched beneath the bed, behind the door, and even inside the wardrobe, though it was scarcely wide enough to conceal a child. Nothing. The window glass, when I touched it, was damp upon the inside, as though someone standing within the room, and not outside it, had been breathing against the cold pane for a good while. The print of a hand remained in the moisture. It was near enough the size of my own, but I did not place mine against it to compare. At breakfast, I asked Mrs. Trosclair plainly who rings the bell at night. "Nobody," she said. It rang last night all the same, Mrs. Trosclair." "Yeah, it does most nights." "Most?" Her knife stopped against the bread. "Every night," she corrected herself. "At the same hour?" "Near enough." "But why?" She poured my coffee without answering directly, her eyes fixed upon the cup the whole time. "That's what it's for." "What is it for, then?" She slid the cup across to me. "You're from north of here, Reverend?" "Yes, near the Arkansas border originally." She nodded slowly, as though this settled some private question of her own. "You believe a thing happens on account of a hand doing it. Door swings open because somebody turned the latch. Wheel rolls because somebody pushed. One thing following the next. Neat as beads strung on a cord. Generally speaking, yes, ma'am, I do believe that. Well, down in this basin, we've had cause to know better. I asked whether she herself had ever seen a soul standing at that rope. No. Has anyone? Not that I know of. And still it rings? Yes. Has anyone attempted in all the years since to keep it from ringing? Something shifted in her face at that. Only slightly, but I saw fear enter it plainly enough. No, sir. I asked what might have happened if someone did try, and she rose from the table without another word, gathered the breakfast things, and told me she had washing that needed hanging. So I pressed her once more. She stopped at the kitchen door. Some sounds are warnings, she said. Some are promises. Best you know which you're silencing before you put your hand over its mouth. Then she went out into the yard and would say nothing further. This afternoon I helped a farmer named Baptiste Fontenot set right a broken rear axle. The sort of ordinary labor I'm glad enough to offer wherever I go, and glad of the distraction besides. His boy, Henry, watched us the whole while from the porch steps. He was perhaps 7 years old, thin-legged and solemn, holding a length of twine between his hands and trying the same knot again and again while we worked. At length, he asked whether I had brought the new bell with me in my wagon. I told him I had. He considered this for some time before speaking again. But will it know us, sir? I asked what he meant by such a question. His father dropped the wrench he was holding. It struck the dirt hard enough to startle Mercy in her traces. Fontenot crossed the yard in 3 strides, took the boy by the upper arm, and sent him inside without another word to either of us. The child did not protest. Before the door closed, he looked back at my wagon. Not at me necessarily, but at the bell beneath the canvas. Fontenot knelt to retrieve his wrench. What did he mean, I asked. I don't know. Boy talks. Yeah, but he asked whether the bell would know you. That boy don't know what he asks. Then perhaps you might explain it to me. He put the wrench back upon the axle and worked with greater force than the task required. I pressed him twice more over the remainder of the afternoon, but he would say nothing further. When the work was finished, he thanked me politely and offered me a measure of cane syrup for Mrs. Trosclair. His manner remained civil throughout, but he did not once look towards the chapel. I have noticed, now that I have begun to look for it, that none of the people upon this ridge look at the chapel windows once the sun has gone down. Passing the building in the evening, their eyes fall to the road instead. At first, I thought this was some kind of tradition, but now I am less certain. It seems closer to a habit, the unconscious obedience of people who have repeated the same caution so long that they no longer remember learning it. I caught myself doing the exact same thing twice today. The second time, I had walked nearly the whole length of the chapel before I realized my eyes had remained fixed upon my own boots. I stopped and forced myself to look up. The windows held only the last gray light of evening. Nothing stood behind them. Even so, I found that I had been holding my breath. I could not tell you when that habit began in me, but it is there now. Your servant, as always, A. Pruitt. Letter 3. September the 12th, 1888. To the board. I have passed 2 full nights inside that chapel of my own choosing, and I ask you to weigh what follows against whatever sober character I have shown across this circuit these past 6 months, for I have need of that credit now more than I ever have before. Both nights, at 11 minutes past midnight, the air within the nave dropped cold with a speed no ordinary evening could account for. Both nights the bell rang, unaided by any hand I could locate. And both nights I watched the coiled rope at the foot of the belfry stairs snap taut and pull downwards. And the floorboards themselves, mind you, not upwards towards the bell, the way a ringer properly draws it. Accuracy is important here, for my own sake as much as the boards. I need you to understand that the rope was not drawn from above. The lower coil struck flat and hard against the boards, as though seized from underneath. It held there for one bare second, fibers stretched tight enough to creak, and then fell loose the instant the bell sounded overhead. On the first night, I believed I had misjudged the direction of the pool. On the second, I knelt beside it with my lantern near the floor and watched the dust jump from the cracks between the boards. Something beneath the chapel had taken hold. There is no cellar under that building. I confirmed this mystery in full daylight, on my hands and knees. The chapel rests upon short stone piers, and the crawl space beneath runs no higher than 18 inches, choked through with roots, mud, and old flood leavings. No one man alive could position himself under there and work that rope without being seen plainly from the yard. I went beneath anyway, just to be certain. This space was tighter than it appeared from the outside. I was obliged to remove my coat and push it ahead of me through the mud. Cypress roots crossed beneath the floor in thick, knotted runs, some broad as a man's thigh, and more than once I mistook their shape in the dark for an arm lying bent in the earth. The soil smelled of standing water and old iron. Above me, the chapel boards gave faintly beneath my weight, though no one stood inside that building. I had reached perhaps halfway towards the belfry stair when something closed around my ankle. I struck my head against the floor joist hard enough to see light. Verrett stood just beyond the foundation stones, his hand fastened around my boot until I had backed clear into the daylight again. His grip surprised me greatly, coming from a man his age. "I told you, Reverend," he said. "Don't study things too close." "I saw that rope pulled through the floor with my own 2 eyes, Mr. Verrett." "I expect you did." "Then you do not deny it happened." "I ain't admitted a thing to you. You're the one crawled under a church, not me." I brushed what mud I could from my shirt and trousers. At the rear corner of the foundation, half swallowed by cypress root, I had found a low mound of unmortared fieldstone. The stone was darker than that supporting the chapel proper, and laid in a rougher, older fashion. The roots did not cross over it. They curved away. I asked whether it had marked a grave. His eyes went hard upon me. "Is that what you were crawling towards, Reverend?" "I was examining the foundation, nothing more." "That ain't the foundation." "Then what is it?" He looked towards the chapel windows for a long while before answering. "We found it standing already when the first families came." "Who is we, precisely, Mr. Verrett?" "Everybody has come after." "After what?" He let a slow breath out go through his nose. "After the first ones learned to leave it be." I asked him what lay beneath the stones. "Something the church holds down." "The building itself?" "The church," he said again, somewhat patient, as though I were slow. "The people in it, the prayers said over it, but the bell most of all of it together. And the ringing each night, what does that accomplish in your understanding of the matter?" "It reminds it." "Reminds it of what?" He looked at me the way a man looks at a child asking its 100th question of the day. "That it ain't time yet." I asked what he meant by that, and he turned away from me. I continued, asking how long the people of Bellerose Hollow had observed this nightly ringing, who had first begun it, and whether any written account remained of the mound beneath the chapel. I confess I was filled with curiosity and just had to know. He had to give me further details. But he gave me nothing. And that in itself, I guess, had become an answer of sorts. That evening, Mrs. Trosclair mended a tear in my coat sleeve while I sat writing at her table. Without looking up from her needle, she asked whether I had found what I was hunting beneath the chapel. I told her Verrett had cut the inspection short. "Silas has kept this town breathing," she said, "by cutting a good many things short over the years. I wouldn't hold it against him." "Do you believe, Mrs. Trosclair, that there is something buried beneath those stones?" Her needle passed clean through the cloth. She took a moment before answering me. "I believe there's questions a man can ask loud enough that the answer takes to looking for him instead." I found the remark theatrical enough that I laughed. I couldn't help it, but I do regret it now. She did not laugh with me. She finished the stitch, bit the thread clean, and asked, plain as asking after the weather, I suppose, just as suddenly, "Have you seen yourself in any windows lately, Reverend?" The question unsettled me more than I could account for at the time. I asked why she wished to know. "Just asking. I have seen nothing that poor old glass and lantern light could not explain away entirely." She folded the coat and passed it back across the table. "That ain't what I asked you, though, is it?" I slept poorly that night. I dreamed I stood in the belfry with the rope wound around my hand. It was warm in the dream, as it had been warm in the waking world. It gave beneath my grip the way living tissue gives, and I could feel a faint motion inside it, something passing upwards through the fibers in slow, regular pulses. When I looked towards the bell, the clapper hanging inside it was not iron. It was a tooth. A single yellow tooth, long as my forearm, hung from a cord of sinew. But I knew the tooth, not whose it had been or from what mouth it had been taken, only that I had seen it before somewhere so long ago that the memory had worn away, leaving behind nothing but some kind of recognition. And I pulled the rope, and the bell rang. In the dream, I understood, with that unique certainty one possesses only while dreaming, that the ringing was an act of mercy. The sound did not travel outwards. It passed down, through the tower, through the chapel floor, through the mound beneath it. From somewhere below came one long, slow inhalation. It continued without pause until the walls of the chapel drew inwards around me, the way a held breath draws a chest tight. I woke with both hands locked around the bedpost. The room smelled of mud. Near the foot of the bed, a damp mark showed dark against the floorboards. It had the rough shape of a hand, though broader across than any human hand ought rightly to be. I sat upon the edge of the bed and watched it dry. The boards lightened slowly from the outer edge inward, until only the center remained dark. At that same moment, I became aware of movement behind me. In the washstand mirror, someone stood there. I did not turn to look directly. The figure in the glass wore my face, though it wore it poorly. The arrangement was correct enough. The beard, the brow, the general set of the head, but the expression logged behind mine. When I breathed, it waited before breathing. When I lifted my hand, its hand followed a moment after. I lowered mine. It did the same. I leaned slightly towards the glass, and it remained still. And then it smiled, even though I had not. I struck the mirror face down upon the washstand and would not look at it again until morning. Mrs. Trosclair found it lying there when she came up with my water. She looked at the unbroken glass for a good while, and then she looked at me. I told her it had fallen on its own, and she said nothing further. I do not think that she needed to. Your servant, A. Pruitt. Letter 4. September the 15th, 1888. Written from Verdun, the parish seat. To the board. I have passed 2 days now away from Bellerose Hollow, and had hoped the distance from it would restore some measure of ordinary judgment to me. I confess it has not. I will not pretend to you that it has. Verdun is scarcely 20 miles from the ridge by any proper reckoning, yet it feels farther. The streets here remain busy after dark. Lamps burn openly in the windows. Men pass panes of glass without lowering their eyes. I had not understood how quickly such ordinary things had begun to seem remarkable to me. At the parish land office, I found the original survey of Bellerose Hollow, drawn up in 1819. The fieldstone mound is marked plainly in the surveyor's own hand, "Not to be disturbed." Beneath that, 2 simple words, "See affidavit." Yet no affidavit remains with the survey. There is only a rust stain, roughly square, where some paper had once been pinned fast to the page and was long since removed. The clerk attending the office could offer no account of when it vanished, nor whether it had been taken deliberately. He seemed little troubled by the absence until I spoke the name Bellerose Hollow out loud. and then he stopped sorting his papers. He directed me to the courthouse archive and would say nothing more. There, an elderly clerk named Miss Onadine Calvert produced for me, reluctantly and only after a good deal of persuading on my part, a diary donated some years ago by a descendant of Josiah Gable himself. The moment I stated that my interest lay with the Bellerose Chapel, she rose from her chair and shut the archive door behind her. She turned the key. "Does the bell there still ring?" she asked. I told her it did. "What hour?" 11 minutes past midnight. She crossed herself where she stood, plain as anything. I had not expected the gesture from a woman charged with keeping a Protestant county's records, though I admit this was a foolish distinction to make under the circumstances. I asked whether the hour held some particular significance that I ought to know. "I know enough," she said, "to ask whether it's still ringing at all, Reverend, and be glad of the answer." She placed the diary upon the table between us. The leather had gone soft with age. Several pages had come loose from the stitching, and the whole of it carried the dry, mineral odor of paper kept too long in a closed room. Before she allowed me to open it, Miss Calvert laid one hand flat upon the cover. "You copy only what you need," she said. "Don't take it out of this room." I assured her I had no intention of doing so. "That ain't quite the promise I asked for." So I promised her plainly. Only then did she remove her hand. The diary records that 6 families came into the basin in the spring of 1819 and found the fieldstone mound already standing upon the ridge. The trappers working that country would not go near it. They warned the settlers away in the plainest terms available to them, though Gable does not record whose warning they repeated or how they themselves had come to know of the place. By his own account, he took the matter for swamp superstition and dismissed it. While his men were digging a well, they breached the lower edge of the mound by accident. He wrote of it thus, and I copy the passage here as near word for word as Miss Calvert allowed time to set down.
"We opened no chamber, nor uncovered bone or relic of any kind. We moved perhaps a dozen stones only, and through the gap beneath was nothing but black earth. Yet I had the strongest fancy that the darkness there was no mere absence of light, but a substance unto itself, and that it regarded us, through that small gap, the same way you would regard an intruder who came uninvited into your own house."
Amos.
Without a fortnight, 3 settlers were dead. The first, one Ezekiel Toops, I set the name down in memory for reasons that will become plain to you shortly, was found seated against a cypress beside the mill pond. He bore no mark of injury anywhere upon him, but his hair had gone entirely white overnight.
Gable would not set down, even in his own private hand, what expression he found upon the dead man's face. He began the sentence twice, struck through both attempts, and left a half-page blank before continuing his account.
The second was a Trosclair girl of 6 years. She vanished from her bed and was discovered the following evening standing beside the mound itself. Her feet were bare. The hem of her nightdress was soaked through with black water, though no rain had fallen and the ground surrounding the stones was dry. She remained unresponsive for 3 full days. When she woke, she remembered nothing of where she had been. For the whole remainder of her life, however, she refused to enter any room containing a mirror once darkness had fallen.
I set this significant detail down and will return to it, for it bears upon my own circumstance more closely than I would like. The third victim goes unnamed. Gable only writes,
"There was less of him remaining that there ought to have been, and less absent from the place than ought to have gone. The ground held the very shape of his sleeping body still, and yet the earth beneath that shape ran warm to the touch, and stirred faintly when a hand was laid upon it."
The settlement would surely have been abandoned then, but for a woman named Marthe Ansel. She was of Acadian people, by what little I can gather, a healer and midwife whom Gable is careful to call a Christian woman, though he admits in the same breath that her practice carried customs older than the language of our own prayers. She believed the thing beneath the mound could not be killed outright. Indeed, she doubted whether it lived in any sense that made the word killing meaningful at all. But it could be deceived. According to Ansel, the creature did not experience the passage of time as men do. It measured intervals instead through repetition and through the breaking of repetition. Gable's words again here.
Moth says it is counting, though not our days as we reckon them. It felt the stones moved from their place, and so began its count anew from some number known only to itself. Each death, she says, was not hunger in it, but merely the turning of another measure.
I have read that passage so many times that I can now repeat it without looking at the page. I wish I could say repetition had made its meaning clearer, but it has not. Ansel proposed a bell, but not merely any bell that was cast for an ordinary purpose. The settlers surrendered every scrap of silver they possessed between them, wedding bands, coins, a christening cup, a woman's silver comb, a pair of small shoe buckles that had belonged to a child already in the ground by then. One further ingredient was required, something shed by the creature itself during its stirring at the breach. Gable describes it only as long, yellow, and warm to the touch despite having lain in cold mud the whole night through.
Ansel wrapped the object in linen with her own hands and allowed no other soul to touch it.
Reading this, I thought at once of the tooth that I saw hanging within the bell in my dream. I have no proof that the object was a tooth. Gable does not call it one. Yet I know what he described before I reached the end of the sentence, and that recognition has troubled me more than any certainty might have. The silver was melted together with the object, and the bell was cast upon the ridge itself on a night when no moon showed. Before the bronze had fully cooled, Ansel pressed her palm flat against its shoulder. Their hand had been cut open for the purpose, whether by her own knife or another's, Gable does not say. She spoke words over the casting that he could not understand and would not, in any case, have repeated if he could. Once hung, the bell was struck one single time. 11 minutes past midnight. Ansel's design called for the same single sound at the same hour every night thereafter without fail. The creature would hear something of itself held within the bronze. The nightly toll would persuade it that the night of the breach had never ended. One night, repeated without end. The bell did not imprison the thing beneath the mound, but it interrupted its count. That is how Gable puts it, and I must confess I have turned that distinction over more than I care to admit over these past few days. A prison restrains by force, you see, but this bell appears to restrain by familiarity. It gives the creature the same sound in the same interval, and whatever lies below accepts the repetition as proof that no time has passed at all. Gable's final entry in the portion I was permitted to copy reads,
We have not taught it sleep. We have only taught it delay. Marth says a lie told long enough and faithfully enough may in time become a room a soul can live inside, though she is quick to add that no room stands anywhere without a door in it somewhere, however well hidden.
Miss Calvert allowed me time to copy that passage by hand, and then took the diary back before I could turn the page. I asked whether later entries had survived. There were such entries once. May I see them? No. Why not, if I may ask? Because the family that gave this diary over to the county cut those pages loose themselves, Reverend, before it ever came to my keeping. I've had it near 11 years, and it came to me already short those pages. She showed me the ragged edge along the binding. Several sheets had been removed entirely. One narrow strip of paper remained caught fast in the stitching, overlooked, I suppose, by whoever had done the cutting all those years before. Upon it, in a hand altogether different from Gable's own, were 6 words. Do not let it learn your face. I asked her plainly what those words might signify. She laid her thumb flat across the strip, covering it from sight entirely. She did not remove it while she spoke. You've been looking in the windows, haven't you, Reverend? I gave her no answer. She knew already, plain as if I had told her outright. I asked whether she had visited Bellerose Hollow herself. Once. When? When I was young enough to think seeing a thing meant understanding it. She did not elaborate further. I asked whether the warning referred to the creature beneath the mound or to something else connected with the bell. "Does it matter which?" she said, "if both of them are looking back?" Before I took my leave of her, she said one other thing that I have not been able to put down since. "A mirror gives back only what stands before it. Old glass gives back what remembers standing there once. Don't you go confusing the two of them, whatever you do down there." I asked how a pane of glass might remember anything. She opened the archive door. "Same way people do," she said. "Poorly, and more than is good for them." I return to Bellerose Hollow tomorrow. The new bell remains there beneath its oilcloth. The old bell continues to ring. I possess more knowledge now than I did when I left the ridge, though I cannot honestly claim to feel better equipped by any part of it. I confess to you plainly that I dread the road. That is not a sentence I have ever before had cause to write to this board in 6 months of service to you, and I do not care for having occasion to write it now. Worse, I find that I'm already measuring the hours until I hear that bell again. Your servant, A. Pruitt. Letter 5, September the 17th, 1888. To the board. Bellerose Hollow seemed altered to me upon my return, and I am fully aware of how that sentence must read from where you sit, whether in Verdun or wherever this letter finally reaches you. The buildings stood exactly where I had left them. The store, the mill, the chapel, the houses. Not one has changed its place, as far as I could tell by looking. And yet the road running from the tree line to Mrs. Trosclair's kitchen door felt longer beneath my feet than it had before I left. I even counted the distance by Mercy's pace, as a man will do to steady his mind when it begins running ahead of him. On my first arrival, the road had measured some 200 paces from the tree line to the chapel steps. Yesterday, it measured 312. I paced it again this morning and arrived at 206. I set this discrepancy down to fatigue, and I'll just leave it there, though I notice that the setting down does not persuade me half so well as I would like. There's another peculiarity. When Mercy first stepped out from beneath the cypress, she stopped in the road and would go no farther. The ridge stood before us in full afternoon light. Mrs. Trosclair's chimney smoked. A woman carried washing between two houses. Somewhere a hammer struck steadily against wood. Nothing appeared amiss. Still, Mercy trembled beneath the harness. I climbed down and led her forward by the bridle, as I had upon our first journey into the hollow. She followed reluctantly and kept turning her head towards the swamp behind us, as though the road we had just traveled remained preferable to whatever waited ahead. When I laid Gable's account before Silas Verrett, he heard the whole of it without once interrupting me, which surprised me somewhat given his manner up to that point. But at the name Ezekiel Toops, his gaze went beyond me to the chapel, and it remained there for a good while. "My own great-grandfather," he said finally. His family, it seems, had preserved several different accounts of that death over the years. Fever, drowning, a fall from a wagon. The cause changed depending on who was telling the story and to whom. Yet near the end of her life, Silas's grandmother had given him the full truth as it had been passed down to her. Ezekiel found white-haired against that same cypress beside the mill pond, smiling, with no one in the family willing to say the word out loud for 2 generations afterwards. "What word?" I asked. Silas looked at me dead in the eyes, smiling. I reminded him that he had just spoken it himself. "Yeah, but that ain't the same as describing it." He would say no more on that distinction. He had dismissed the story for most of his life, he told me, as the wandering talk of an old woman's failing mind. "I guess I owe her an apology for that," he said. "A bit late in the coming, I expect, seeing as she's been in the ground longer than you've been alive, Reverend." I told him Martha Ansell believed the bell worked its deception upon the creature by repeating one single night without variation. 1 hour, one sound, world without end. Silas nodded slowly, the way a man nods at something he already knew but had never before heard put into those distinct words. "Then we keep repeating it." "But the bell is failing, Mr. Verrett. You have seen the crack yourself. Then we keep it failing just as long as it pleases to fail, and no longer than that. But it could burst entirely, and soon. So could the ground under all of us, for that matter. Ain't stopped the ground from holding yet, has it? That is hardly the same thing. No, he said. Ground might give us warning. I asked whether anyone remained upon the ridge who understood the whole of Ansel's original working, the words she had spoken, the manner of the casting, or whatever protection she had placed upon that bell. No, Reverend. Were no instructions ever written down and kept somewhere? Instructions is what gets fools killed, Reverend. Folks around here don't keep instructions passed hand to hand. What do you keep? We keep the rule. And what rule is that, precisely, Mr. Verrett? Don't stop the bell. He looked towards the chapel then, though not as high as the tower. That's the whole of it. Always has, always was. I asked what would happen if the bell failed without any hand interfering. Silas's expression tightened. Same thing as if a man stopped it himself, I expect. Whatever is under there don't care much for a reason. Later that afternoon, I found him oiling the rope, leather gloves drawn over his hands despite the considerable heat. He worked the oil into the fibers slowly, beginning at the lower coil and stopping before his hands passed above the height of his own shoulders. I asked plainly why he wore gloves, given that I had handled the same rope barehanded more than once without harm. He examined the fibers for some time before answering. Rope gets rough with age is all. I have touched it myself and taken no injury. You've done a great many things so far, he said, without injury coming of them. He pulled one glove tighter at the wrist. Don't mean the injury ain't waiting on you somewhere down the line. I noticed that not once did his eyes travel upward beyond the knot towards the bell. You never seem to look at it, I said. I know well enough what it looks like without looking again. In its reflection the other night, I saw... He caught my wrist. The speed of it startled me more than the strength. The oil bottle slipped from his other hand and struck the floor. Neither of us moved at once to retrieve it. Don't tell me, he said. His voice had gone low, and nearer to plain fear than I had yet heard from him in all of our conversations. Don't you go describing to me what you saw. Don't give it a better shape than it's already got by saying it out loud. And I asked whether he believed speaking of the thing might strengthen it. I believe names are handles, he said. Descriptions, too. You give a thing enough of either, don't be surprised when it finds something to hold on to. He released my wrist and knelt slowly to gather up the fallen bottle. I asked whether he himself had once seen something in the bronze as a younger man. He continued working for a good while before answering. Back when I was 12 years old, I polished that bell for my own father, same as his father before him had him do. He turned the oil bottle in his hands. I saw myself in it. I thought I did, leastways. What did you see? My reflection kept right on rubbing after my own hand had already stopped. The chapel seemed to grow quieter around us. And what came of that, Mr. Verrett? I quit looking. Was that the whole of it? No. He resumed oiling the rope. What else happened? He would give me nothing more. However, I pressed him through the remainder of the afternoon. I found myself studying his missing finger while he worked. The scar ended smoothly where the first joint ought to have continued, too old and clean to tell me anything of how it happened. I asked whether the bell had taken it. I felt the boldness rise in me as I did so, and Silas stopped. He didn't bother looking at me. I told you not to give things shape, Reverend. That's no answer. That's the answer you're getting. Mrs. Trosclair brewed her coffee stronger than usual after supper that evening. I remarked upon it without thinking much of the remark. You've had 3 cups already tonight, Reverend. I looked at the cup in my hand. I had no memory whatsoever of drinking the first 2. This troubled me considerably more than the strength of the coffee itself. She pointed towards the wash basin. 2 used cups stood there beside my supper plate, each bearing the faint brown mark of coffee around its inner rim. I was surprised. I asked when I had drunk them. You had one before supper, and one while you were telling me about Verdine. I do not remember telling you about Verdine. Her eyes remained upon me. You told it twice. What did I say? The same exact things, both times. Exactly the same? Near enough. She gathered the cups and carried them to the basin. I watched her wash them and tried to summon even one clear memory of either conversation, but nothing came. Later, while undressing for bed, I made another discovery. I found mud caked beneath my fingernails. My boots stood beside the door entirely clean. They had not left the room since supper, so as far as I knew. I don't know, my dear board, if you've ever had that feeling of losing time and not understanding when or why or what it was lost to. And this mud that was beneath my nails, it was black and fine. I noticed it was the same dark silt that I had seen beneath the chapel. I washed my hands twice. The smell of wet iron remained. Upon the writing desk lay 4 pages filled in my own mistakable hand. I had no memory of setting down a single word, and yet the first page contained a clear description of the bell tower. I had written of its height, the narrow stair, the timber supports, and the manner in which the old bronze hung from its yoke. The account was sensible enough, though more detailed than anything I remember observing. The second page repeated the same description, almost word for word. Small gaps had appeared within it. A missing article, a verb absent from the middle of a sentence, empty spaces where words should have been. The third page was broken down into fragments. Tower above, rope below, cold where the face, one sound returning. The fourth page held only a single line. I will set it down exactly as I found it, though I confess I'd rather not.
It is colder when it looks through me.
The final word has been written several times atop itself, each repetition pressed more deeply into the paper than the last. I burned all 4 pages in the wash basin, rather than keeping them in the room. The first 3 caught quickly. The fourth resisted the flame. The edge blackened, but the fire would not travel beyond the first few letters until I held the match beneath it long enough to scorch my fingers. As the sheet finally curled inward and fell to ash, something knocked from within the wall beside the bed. 3 knocks. And then a pause. 3 more. And then another pause. And then one alone. I sat very still. I heard the rhythm of my own name spoken slowly.
Amos.
I told myself there was no sense in the count. My name has only 2 syllables. Even as I thought this, the knocking came again, and this time I heard where the division lay. Not 3 knocks, but 3 knocks and 1. 1 knock, and then 2. A pause, and then 3. Another pause, and then 1.
Amos Pruitt.
I quit the room directly and passed the remainder of the night below in Mrs. Trosclair's kitchen, sitting beside the cold stove until daylight came. I did not wake her, and I don't believe she slept. More than once I heard the boards above me creak beneath a slow passage from the bed towards the washstand. The footsteps would stop there. After a time they would return, always the same number of steps, always the same intervals between them. Mrs. Trosclair found me sitting at the table before dawn had properly broken. She didn't even ask why I was there. She looked toward the ceiling for a long while before speaking. Was it walking again? I asked what she meant. Your room, Reverend. You have heard something up there yourself, then? Yes, every night since you left me for Verdine. She hesitated. And before that, besides, if I'm honest with you. The room stood entirely empty while I was away. I know. She left the words there between us. How long has it been walking? Longer than you've been staying in it. Then why did you put me there? Her face changed. I somewhat regret the accusation now, for that's exactly what it was, however calmly I may have spoken it. I didn't put you nowhere, she said. You asked for that room facing the chapel. I remembered then that she was right. When I first arrived, she had offered me a smaller room at the rear of the house. I had chosen the front room myself, but I could not remember why. Mrs. Trosclair set a cup of coffee before me. Drink. When I lifted it, I saw my reflection thrown plainly upon the black surface. My eyes in the reflection were closed. I stood there with them wide open, looking directly down into that cup. The reflected face remained still, and then slowly, one eye opened. I spilled the whole cup across the table. Neither Mrs. Trosclair nor I moved to clean it for a good while after. Your servant, A. Pruitt. Letter 6, September the 19th, 1888. To the board. Small things. I have come around, these last 2 days, to believing small things are the only warning a man is ever given before the larger ones arrive to collect whatever is owed. Mrs. Trosclair's old hound will no longer cross the road toward the chapel by any means. Yesterday she tried leading him by the collar herself. The animal planted his feet before they reached the middle of the road, lowered his belly to the dirt, and began trembling so violently that his teeth struck together. She coaxed him, and then she pulled. He flattened himself lower and fouled the ground where he lay rather than take one step further towards that building. The moment she released the collar, he scrambled backwards beneath the porch and would not come out again for the remainder of the day. I felt for that poor dog. That same afternoon, I found him watching the chapel through the gaps between porch boards. He made no sound. His eyes followed something moving from one chapel window to the next. I looked, but saw nothing there. A Fontenot boy woke screaming 2 nights running and told his mother the bell had rung directly beneath his bed. The first night, she dismissed the matter as a dream, but then the second, she lifted the mattress to prove there was nothing beneath it. The floorboards stood wet through. No water could have been spilled there by any means she or her husband could account for, and the ceiling beneath showed no stain. The moisture had come up from the boards themselves. Baptiste told me the room smelled of pond mud. He said this reluctantly and only after I asked him 3 times. The chapel hymnals have lately taken to opening on their own to the same page. Psalms 88.
Thou hast laid me in the lowest pit, in darkness, in the deeps.
Silas closes every one of them each morning without fail. He moves from pew to pew, shuts each book, and places it squarely upon the bench. By evening, every hymnal stands open again to the same passage. I have stood there and even watched him close them. I have returned before sundown and found them open again. He says nothing about it, and neither do I any longer. A chair near the rear of the chapel remains warm to touch after dark, regardless of what the weather is doing outside. No soul in Bellerose Hollow will sit in it. I asked Mrs. Trosclair whether the chair belonged to anyone in particular. Used to, she said. To whom? She looked toward the chapel. Depends what year you ask. The western window has begun, on clear afternoons, to reflect clouds where none show in the actual sky above it. Yesterday, it reflected the chapel at full night, dark, lantern lit, the pews lost in shadow, while the eastern glass, less than 10 feet away, carried honest afternoon sunlight straight through it undisturbed. In the reflected chapel, someone stood beneath the bell rope. I didn't even bother to look long enough to see who. To be honest, I've stopped looking at that window altogether. I do not know precisely when I made that decision. I just noticed only this morning that I had already been obeying it for several days. Mrs. Trosclair asked me at breakfast why I no longer look directly at people when they speak to me. I told her that was ridiculous, that I did. She shook her head. You look beside us, Reverend, not at us. You've been doing it for 2-3 days now. I thought the observation mistaken until she asked me to look directly at her. And I attempted it. I tried. I honestly tried. My eyes settled upon her left shoulder instead. I corrected them and found myself looking toward the wall beside her face. The effort of just holding her gaze became so uncomfortable that my eyes began to water. There's nothing wrong with this woman's appearance, nothing altered in her face, but still, some instinct in me resisted looking squarely at it, as though the features might continue moving after the person beneath them had gone still. I have made every effort since to correct the habit. I remain entirely unaware of it until someone speaks my name. Last night, alone in the chapel, I heard that name spoken from beneath the floor.
Amos.
I go there most every night now, whether wisdom recommends it or not. I can't honestly tell you why, except that I feel I must. The way a man feels compelled to press a wound simply to learn whether it still pains him. Perhaps I believe that if I witness enough, I will finally understand. Perhaps understanding is no longer what draws me there. I had stationed myself near the pulpit with a lantern, my notebook, and my pocket watch laid upon the front pew. At 5 minutes past midnight, the chapel grew cold. At 8 minutes past midnight, the rope stirred within its coil. At 10, something gave a long, slow breath beneath the floorboards. Then, before the bell rang, the voice said,
Amos.
It came from directly beneath my feet. The voice belonged to no age or sex I could put a name to. It was neither loud nor faint. It sounded close enough that, had the floor not separated us, I might have felt the speaker's breath against my boots. I answered before a better sense could stop the word in my throat. Who is there? The instant I spoke, the bell rang. 1 stroke. The answering tone came up from below, so deep that the lantern flame bent towards the floor. The motion began beneath the altar and passed slowly towards the rear pews. Each board rose the width of a coin in its turn and settled down again once the thing had moved beyond it. Dust shifted along the seams. The nails groaned in the wood. The movement proceeded at the pace of a man walking slowly down the aisle. When it reached the last pew, it stopped. The western window reflected a figure seated there. It wore my coat. I kept my eyes fixed upon the front door. I would not turn to look directly at either the pew or the glass. And then, in my own voice, came the words.
Who is there?
The cadence was mine. The breath before the sentence was mine.
Who is there?
Even the small catch at the end belonged to me, the one my voice takes when I'm afraid and not trying to show it. I remained still. The voice repeated the question, slower this time.
Who is
There.
The words sounded less natural when separated, as though whatever spoke them understood the whole sentence, but had not yet learned where one word ended and the next began. And then it tried once more.
Who is there?
Perfectly. I ran from the chapel. I ran, and I'm not even ashamed to tell you this, though I have been ashamed of a good many things upon this circuit and expect to be ashamed of more before it's through. But I ran. Silas stood waiting in the road. He wasn't holding a lantern. The darkness concealed most of his face, but his posture told me he had known already what would have happened. It knows you're here now, he said. I demanded an explanation, sharper than I ought to have spoken to a man his age. You've been asking after it, Reverend, reading up on it in Verdun, measuring it with your own 2 hands beneath that floor, hunting for it in every pane of glass you pass, whether you mean to or not. I was just trying to understand what threatens this town. Attention ain't a door that only swings the one way. It never was. What does it want of me then, if you know so much? Want is a man's word, Reverend. I don't know, as it rightly applies to a thing like this one. It was imitating my voice. It means it's been listening long enough to get the shape of it right. That's all that means. But that's enough. Silas looked back towards the chapel. The bell rope moved faintly behind the western glass, though the bell had already rung and no wind stirred outside. It hears a thing, he said, and then it repeats it. If it hears it long enough, it begins repeating it better. And when the repetition becomes exact? He did not answer. He walked me the rest of the way to Mrs. Trosclair's porch himself. Before I climbed the steps, he caught my sleeve. Whatever you hear tonight, don't you answer yourself back. What do you expect me to hear? Whatever it costs you not to. I asked him then, plainly, what he had seen in the bell as a boy of 12 all those years ago. Silas looked towards my room. No lamp burned behind the window. Even so, a silhouette stood plainly within it, one hand resting against the glass. Silas saw it too. I watched the recognition move through his face. Your reflection, he said quietly. Did it ever smile before you did, Reverend? I found I could give him no honest, real answer. He removed his hat. I had not seen him do so before, not even within the chapel. My own father saw the same thing once when he was a young man. His eyes remained fixed upon the window. 3 nights after, we found him down by the mill pond, alive still, but he couldn't call my name to mind after that. Couldn't call his own either. What had happened to him? Nothing you could point to, nothing the doctor could mend. Silas turned his hat slowly between his hands. He lived 8 more years past that night and never once looked into a pane of glass again, so long as he drew breath in this world. Did he recover any memory at all? Some mornings he knew my mother. Some he thought she was his sister. Near the end, he'd sit beside the wall and speak to somebody we couldn't see. Well, what did he say? Mostly he just asked who was there. The figure remained in my window, and I kept my eyes below its face. Why did you never tell me any of this before now, Mr. Barrett? You arrived with a new bell riding in your wagon and certainty riding plain in your mouth. He placed his hat back on his head. Would you have believed one word of it coming from me on that first day? I really wish I could have told him yes, but turning the question over honestly, I found that I could not. Don't sleep in that room again tonight, he said. Mrs. Trosclair made me a pallet beside the kitchen stove. She moved the table against the wall to make room and brought down 2 blankets without asking what had occurred outside. Near 2 a.m, footsteps crossed the floor of my room directly above us, from the bed to the washstand, and then a pause, and then from the washstand toward the window. Mrs. Trosclair lay awake on the far side of the kitchen. I could tell by the steadiness of her breathing that she was pretending otherwise. Neither of us spoke, and the footsteps stopped. We then heard the window latch lift, and metal scraped softly against metal. The swollen frame creaked upwards, inch by inch. Cool air passed through the kitchen, though every door and window below remained shut. Something shifted its weight across the sill above us. The boards groaned as it leaned outward, and for several seconds there was only silence. Then I heard breathing. The sound above continued. Your servant, A. Pruitt. Letter 7, September the 21st, 1888. To the board. I have arrived at a decision I expect you will judge me harshly for once this reaches you, and I will not spend the whole of this letter defending it beyond what I can set down plainly. The crack in the bell has lengthened considerably these last few days. Upon my first arrival, I measured it at a touch over 3 inches. Well, it now runs 5 and approaches the crown of the bronze. A second, finer line has begun branching from the first. I marked its end yesterday morning with chalk. By evening, it had extended nearly half an inch beyond the mark. Any founder worth the name would declare the failure of that bell imminent beyond reasonable argument. I have some small claim to judging such things myself. After 6 months spent examining church bells across this circuit, I laid the entire matter before the church council. Silas Verrett attended, along with Baptiste Fontenot and the 2 eldest Trosclair sons, who I gather represent their mother's late husband's interest in chapel affairs. We met in the rear room of the store rather than inside the chapel. No one outwardly suggested the change of location, but no one needed to either. Fontenot told us then, for the first time, that his father had once brought a bell founder from Baton Rouge to inspect the old bronze properly. The man arrived before noon on a clear summer day. He carried a complete set of tools and spoke, by Fontenot's account, with considerable confidence about the ease of repairing an ordinary fissure. He climbed the tower alone, and then less than an hour later, he came down without his tool satchel. That man refused payment. He would not return for the tools he had left behind. He just packed the remainder of his belongings and departed the ridge before nightfall. "What did he say he found?" I asked. Fontenot rubbed his palms against his trousers. "Nothing. He abandoned his tools over nothing? He said the bell was sound." "Well, it plainly was not." "Yes, I know that, Reverend." "Well, what else did he say?" Fontenot looked toward Silas. Silas gave him no assistance. At last, Fontenot said, "He told my father the crack was on the wrong side." Again, with these riddles, I asked him what that meant. He never did explain. "Well, was it inside the bell?" That's what my father believed. No one had raised the matter again in all the years since, until my arrival forced the question. I proposed that the old bronze be taken down, melted entirely, and recast, with every ounce of the original metal preserved in the new bell. I put this forward as a fair compromise between their custom and the plain physical safety of the congregation. Silas would not hear any of it. "That bell ain't only bronze, Reverend, and you know that much yourself now, whatever you keep telling yourself otherwise. We would lose none of the original metal in the melting. You can't preserve a thing that recognizes its own self in the melting, no matter how careful you are about it." I asked him, more sharply than I intended, to speak plainly for once and leave off all of the damn riddling. For the first time since my arrival, his composure broke entirely. What showed beneath was not anger. It seemed to be grief. "That tooth's in it," he said. "The silver's in it. Martha Ansell's own damn blood is in it. Whatever words she spoke while the metal still sat soft in the mold, God alone knows what they are." He leaned both hands upon the table. "You melt all that down and pour it in fresh. Maybe the lie carries through into the new casting." His voice lowered. "Or maybe it don't." No one spoke. Silas looked from one face to another. "You could hang a plain steel bell up there and ring it faithful every night until judgment morning comes, and it won't signify one thing to what's down under us." "Why not?" "Because it don't hear a bell ringing, Reverend." He looked at me. "It never did." "Well, what does it hear then?" "Kin." The room went silent around that word. Even now, writing it, I find something in it I cannot properly account for. Kin. Not likeness, not memory. Something belonging to the same body. Something it recognizes as having come from itself. Even when he said the word, even as simple as just kin, I felt tears well up in my eyes. I asked whether the fragment placed in the original casting had been shed by the creature or taken from it. Silas's face tightened. "That distinction matter much to you?" "It may matter to the work." "Everything matters to the work with you." He turned away. I suggested, once the silence had gone on longer than I could comfortably endure, that we band the old bell with iron to prevent the crack from spreading. "No iron band is going to hold it," Silas said. "How can you claim that with such certainty?" "Because something's helping the crack along from the inside." The youngest Trosclair's son crossed himself. Silas noticed and gave a tired shake of his head. "Been helping it a good while now, if you want my honest opinion, which you didn't ask for, but I'll give it to you anyway." "What purpose would that serve?" "Purpose again. What word would you prefer?" "I wouldn't." The meeting ended without agreement. It is more honest to say that it ended when no one remained willing to speak anymore. That evening I climbed the tower alone. I meant only to inspect the fissure once more by lantern light before deciding anything further. The air in the belfry felt warmer than the chapel below, though night had already settled over the ridge. The wooden frames surrounding the bell remained cool. The bronze did not. I placed the back of my fingers against it and drew them away at once. It felt fevered, The original crack had widened enough that I could fit the edge of a fingernail into it. On the bell's far side, a second crack had opened. It curved in a shape I could not honestly mistake for anything except the line of a mouth, turned upward faintly at one corner. I told myself I saw a random fracture and that my mind supplied the rest. Then the corner of it lengthened while I watched it, only slightly. I stood there a long while before I could bring myself to move. The polished surface of the bell threw back the tower behind me. Silas stood upon the stair in the reflection. I turned. No one stood there. The stairwell was empty. I looked back towards the bronze. The reflection of Silas remained. His face appeared younger than it does now. His hair was dark. His shoulders were straight. A boy of perhaps 12 stood where the old man ought to have been. He raised one hand slowly and pointed above my head. I did not follow the gesture. Something touched the crown of my head. The pressure was light, almost gentle, the way a parent might rest a hand upon a sleeping child to assure himself it has settled properly for the night. I could feel the shape of each finger through my hair, and there were too many. I fled down the stair faster than good sense allows a man of my age. My boot caught upon the final turn. I fell against the lower steps and split the skin above my eyebrow upon the corner of the newel post. I remember lying there for several seconds, looking towards the belfry. Nothing followed me down. I heard the bell give a small sound above. Mrs. Trosclair cleaned the wound for me beneath her kitchen lamp. She didn't even ask me how I had come by it until she had washed the blood from my face and confirmed the cut would not require stitching. Then, without warning, she asked me to recite the 23rd Psalm. I began plainly enough. Of course, I know it by heart. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. The next line would not come. I stopped, and Mrs. Trosclair waited. I tried again. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. Nothing followed. I have spoken that psalm over many graves than I could hope to count across 6 years of ministry. I know it the way I know the arrangement of my own hands, yet the words were gone. There was no sense of searching for them and failing to find them. I encountered only a clean absence where they had always been. Mrs. Trosclair's needles stopped midway through the bandage. Her hand rested against my forehead to steady me. It began to tremble. That frightened me more than the failing of my own memory. "Reverend," she whispered, "what's your mother's name?" "Eleanor," I answered immediately. "And your father's?" "Thomas." "Where were you born?" "Near Camden, Arkansas." She nodded slowly after each answer. "What church did you first preach in?" I told her. "And who ordained you?" I told her that as well. "What day is it today?" "The 18th of September." Mrs. Trosclair lowered the cloth. "It's the 21st. For a moment, I believed she was mistaken. I counted backward through the events of the preceding days. Verdine, my return, the pages upon the desk, the chapel. Each memory seemed clear when taken by itself. They did not fit together properly. 3 whole days had gone missing somewhere between them. "We need to get you off this ridge, Reverend," she said. I reminded her the bell might fail entirely at any hour, and that my duty lay with the safety of the congregation, regardless of whatever fear had governed their judgment over the years. "Then let it fail, with you gone from here, at the least." "My duty to these people—" "Your duty isn't to feed your own self to a thing because you're too proud to call running the wisdom it plainly is." Her words stung me. I told her so, more sharply than I had any right to address the woman who had just taken me into her home and fed me and asked nothing in return. I told her fear had governed Bellerose Hollow for nearly 70 years. I told her their refusal to act had allowed a mortal danger to remain unanswered in their own churchyard. I told her that God did not grant men reason only for them to surrender it whenever darkness pressed close. And the more I spoke, the stronger my certainty became. Each sentence derived complete, measured, convincing, and I felt for the first time in many days entirely myself. Mrs. Trosclair listened without interruption. When I finished, she said only, "You sound like your own self again, Reverend, talking that way." And I asked what she meant by that. She studied my face. "That's exactly why I'm scared for you, Reverend." I waited as she folded the bloodied cloth upon itself. "That's the whole of it." I have considered her words throughout the day. I believe she meant that whatever influence has disturbed my sleep and memory now understands how to imitate my convictions as well as my voice. But I reject that conclusion. I must. A man cannot surrender every thought merely because something has learned to resemble him. If I begin doubting every judgment I make, then it has already taken more from me than any lost day or forgotten psalm. I have resolved, despite all objection, to proceed with the exchange of the bells in 2 days' time. I will lower the old bronze myself and raise the new steel casting in its place, whatever the council, Mr. Verrett, or any other person upon this ridge says against it. That old bell is failing. That fact is not superstition. It's visible and measurable. A cracked bell suspended above a congregation presents a plain danger whether anything lies beneath the chapel or doesn't. I cannot, in good Christian conscience, place an old custom, however sincere it may be, however dearly bought, above the physical safety of people entrusted to my care by this board and by God himself. Even as I set that sentence down, I believe it to be true. I mean to go on believing it. And there it is. For whatever it is, whatever it's worth to you reading, in whatever safe room you happen to occupy, there is the whole truth. Your servant in Christ, Amos Pruitt. Letter 8, September the 23rd, 1888. To the board. I write in considerable haste and ask your pardon in advance for whatever this letter lacks in order. We did not make the exchange of bells as I had resolved 2 days ago. The weather made that decision for us instead, and it made it decisively. A storm came up from the Gulf yesterday afternoon with a speed I have never witnessed in all my years upon this earth. There had been heat enough through the morning, but nothing extraordinary for this country. Near 3 o'clock, the southern sky darkened at once. Honest daylight turned to a black-green dusk within minutes, without so much as a cooling breeze to announce what approached. The air pressed close against the skin. Birds dropped from the trees and vanished into the brush. Before the first rain fell, every dog upon the ridge broke and ran. They did not flee from the storm. They ran toward the swamp. 6 or 7 animals together, tails drawn tight beneath them, whining as they crossed the road and disappeared among the cypress. Mrs. Trosclair's old hound went with them. He had refused even to cross the road towards the chapel 2 days before. Yesterday he tore loose from the porch so violently that the rope at his collar broke and left a strip of hide beneath his jaw. Not one of those animals has returned, and I do not expect now that they will. Silas watched them disappear from where he stood beside the chapel. "They know it before we do," he said. The two of us were in the tower together, checking the rigging for the work that was to begin the following morning, when the lightning started moving along the ridge. I have tried several times to describe its manner, and I still remain dissatisfied with every attempt. You see, it did not strike downwards in isolated bolts, as lightning properly ought. It seemed to travel. The first flash passed through a cypress near the eastern edge of the hollow. The light moved from that trunk to the next without touching the ground between, and then crossed to another farther up the ridge. Each flash landed closer and closer to the chapel. It seemed less like weather than something searching by touch. Silas abandoned the rope and moved towards the stairs. "We need to get down." But before we could descend, the bell began to tremble. No sound came from it. The clapper hung still. Yet the whole body of the bell shook upon its yoke, rapidly at first, and then slower, as though answering some rhythm too deep for us to hear. The crack along its shoulder had widened. I could see darkness through it. not the opposite wall of the tower, just darkness. The same impression Gable had set down after the breach in 1819, and it came to me with such force that I understood his meaning immediately. What showed through the fissure did not seem like an absence of light. It seemed like a substance, something looking outwards through a narrow opening. The bell's surface reflected the whole of Bellerose Hollow beneath us. In that reflection, the sky was clear. No clouds stood above the ridge. The houses remained still beneath a pale afternoon sun that bore no resemblance to the storm raging outside the tower. Every door in the reflected hollow stood open. No people occupied the road. No animals moved in the yards. Figures stood within every window I could see. One in Mrs. Trosclair's kitchen, one in the store, two in the upper windows of the Fontenot house, and several within the chapel glass below us. And they each seemed to wear my face. I could not discern their features clearly at that distance, but I knew them in the same immediate way that a man knows his own reflection upon working, before his mind has fully gathered itself. All of them looked upwards, towards the tower, towards me. I shut my eyes. Silas shouted something I could not hear over the wind. A great pressure entered both ears at once. My mouth filled with the taste of iron, stronger than blood, and the lantern flame drew long and blue towards the bell. Something moved inside the bronze. I heard it then, not with my ears. A count. No words accompanying it, just intervals, measured spaces, turning one after another in the dark. The whole world went white. I do not know how long I remained senseless, but when my sight returned, I was lying against the tower wall. Silas was on his knees beside the stair, one arm drawn across his face. The bell was gone from its yoke. It had not fallen, it had burst. Blackened fragments lay across the belfry floor and had punched through the boards in several places. Others had rained into the churchyard and scattered across the mud. The air smelled of lightning, hot metal, and something older beneath both. Several pieces still steamed in the rain when we descended. One fragment had sunk halfway into the chapel steps. Another lay against the road and had scorched the earth beneath it black. The rope hung from the beam in two ragged links. The lower end twitched where it touched the floor. Silas stamped his boot upon it and held it still. The crown of the bell, which bore the face-shaped corrosion I noticed upon my first day in Bellerose Hollow, had landed upright beside the fieldstone mound. It stood in the mud like a planted marker. Rain struck every surface around it, but none touched the bronze. The drops appeared to bend away before reaching it. Silas crossed the churchyard and stood over the scattered pieces for a while. He removed his hat. "Well," he said at last, "that's done it then." For several minutes, I confess honestly that I felt only the practical dismay of a workman whose labor had been ruined by weather. I looked toward the new steel bell beneath its covering and considered whether we might raise it before full darkness. I thought we could brace the damaged floor, replace the rope, complete the exchange before the appointed hour, as though this were an ordinary setback, as though the old bell had served no purpose beyond calling a congregation to worship. I began giving Silas instructions. He didn't even answer me. Mrs. Trosclair stepped onto her porch. She did not look towards the tower. She looked at the ground beneath her own feet. "It stopped," she said. Only then did I understand. At 11 minutes past midnight, no bell rang over Bellerose Hollow. Not one stroke. And for the first time in 69 years, by every account I could gather, the appointed hour passed unanswered. What followed was not the plain absence of sound. The silence arrived. One moment, the swamp spoke as it always does after rain, crickets, frogs, water dripping from the cypress, the low movement of insects through the grass, and then every sound ended altogether. The rain itself stopped, but no final drops fell from the roofs. Water clung beneath every eave and remained there, trembling without release. The leaves ceased moving, and the air went still. Even the flame in Mrs. Trosclair's kitchen lamp stood motionless. The whole hollow seemed to be listening back at us, and we listened toward it. For one long moment, the ridge and every soul upon it held the same breath. At 12 minutes past midnight, the windows of Mrs. Trosclair's house fogged over from the outside. All of them, the kitchen panes, the front room, the upper windows. A pale film spread across the glass, despite the heat inside and the wet air beyond. Words began forming in the condensation. No hand appeared. The letters drew themselves slowly, one line at a time, as though an unseen finger moved with great care.
How many?
Mrs. Trosclair threw a blanket across the kitchen window before the final letter had fully formed. It made no difference. The same words stood upon every pane in the house. Silas arrived soon after and walked from window to window without looking directly at any of them. "What is it asking?" I said. He shook his head. "Might not be asking us." At 2:00, the chapel door swung open on its own. It opened slowly, though no wind moved. The hinges gave one long cry across the silent ridge. The door remained open for the rest of the night. No one approached to close it. Through Mrs. Trosclair's covered kitchen window, I could see a dim light moving within the chapel. It passed between the pews and stopped near the altar, and then climbed the tower stair, though no lantern showed upon the steps themselves. At 3:00 in the morning, Silas knocked upon Mrs. Trosclair's door. He did not wait to be invited inside. "Get dressed," he told us. Mrs. Trosclair was already dressed, as was I. Silas looked towards the floor. The cups upon the table had begun to tremble. A low vibration moved through the boards beneath our feet. It rose, paused, fell, and then came again. Mrs. Trosclair took hold of the table. Silas closed his eyes. The ground beneath Bellerose Hollow had begun to breathe. I will write again if I find myself able. A. Pruitt. Letter 9, September the 24th, 1888. This letter was found unfinished among Reverend Pruitt's effects. Bored. It's past 2 in the morning, though my watch has stopped and begun again 3 separate times since midnight by my count, so I cannot rightly say what hour this truly is. The hands now stand at 11 minutes past 12. They have stood there for nearly half an hour. The second hand continues moving. I have decided it's better to keep writing than to sit here listening to what is outside this house. Something has awakened beneath Bellerose Hollow. I do not know a gentler way to set that sentence down. I've tried several times. The first sound came like distant thunder. A low vibration passed through the floorboards and set the cups trembling against one another upon Mrs. Trosclair's sideboard, where they had stood undisturbed through the whole of my lodging here. The motion did not come from beneath the chapel alone. It passed beneath this house, the store, the mill, the road itself. I could feel it traveling outward through the soles of my feet, all the way into the cypress where the ridge disappeared into the swamp. Each breath raised the floor a little. The boards settled when it released. Dust fell from the ceiling. The walls gave small sounds in their joints, like an old ship answering deep water. The mound never held the creature entire. I understand that now. Far too late to matter. The mound was the only nearest place where it touched against the surface of things. Every house upon the ridge showed a light. People stood in their doorways without speaking. Many carried lanterns, but few had lit them, as though the flame itself might draw some special notice upon whoever held it. No children cried. That troubled me. I saw them gathered behind their mothers' skirts, faces pale in the dark, yet no one made a sound. Silas waited in Mrs. Trosclair's yard. He held his lantern against his chest. It was unlit. "What do we do now?" I asked. I do not believe I have ever asked a question and wanted less to hear the honest answer. "We wait," he said. "For what?" "To see what it remembers first." The earth surrounding the mound began to rise and settle with each breath. Black silt pushed between the stones and withdrew again. The smell reached us even across the road. Stagnant water, hot iron, something sweet gone badly to rot beneath both. Cracks opened through the churchyard, and they crossed the road, passed beneath the houses, and continued into the swamp. From the widest fissure rose a surface too vast to call a limb of anything. It was black and wet, gently curved. It showed itself the way the back of some great animal appears beneath shallow water before sinking from sight. Another surface rose near the mill, and another beneath the road, another farther out among the trees. They were not separate creatures, and I understand that now. They belonged to the same body, or else to portions of one body that had grown so immense that the distinction between part and whole no longer carries any useful meaning. The ridge had not been built above a buried thing. Rather, the ridge was resting upon it. The people began praying, quietly at first. The Lord's Prayer passed from house to house, like fire taking slowly through damp wood. One voice, then another, and then many. I tried to join them, but the words would not come. I knew where they ought to begin. I knew the rhythm. My mouth remembered the shape of the prayer, but nothing remained inside of it. Silas heard my silence beside him. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what, Silas?" "For not getting you clear of this place, while you were still all your own self to get clear with." The breathing beneath us quickened. Each inhalation lasted nearly a full minute. Each pause became shorter than the one before, the gaps closing like the breath of a man who has run too far and cannot yet catch himself. Silas listened, with his head tilted. "I don't know how long it's been asleep," he whispered. "Not exact, anyhow." The words upon Mrs. Trosclair's windows returned to me then.
"How many?"
The creature had not been asking us. It had been asking itself, the only way it knew how to ask anything. Across the churchyard, the fragments of the broken bell began to move. Each piece turned slowly in the mud until its broken surface faced the mound. The sound passed through all of them together. Not necessarily a ring, maybe a memory of one. A thin metallic recollection of the single stroke that had interrupted the creature's count every night for 69 years. The ground shuddered. The dark surfaces in the fissures withdrew at once, and then rose again. Every window along the ridge reflected the same figure. I saw it in the chapel glass, the store window, Mrs. Trosclair's kitchen pane, even the rainwater gathered in the wagon ruts at my feet. The shape stood behind every person upon the ridge at the same time. It reached higher than the cypress. It possessed no fixed edge that my eyes could hold. Where shoulders ought to have been, it widened into forms like bare branches. Where a head might have rested, there was only a narrowing, hollowed mark here and there by small points of pale light. I mistook them at first for stars, but they were not. No one turned directly to look at it. Not one person upon the whole ridge. The reflected shape leaned forward. Its attention settled upon us. I felt the weight of it, and as plainly as a hand placed upon my shoulder. Knees buckled along the road. Lanterns slipped from weakened hands. The pressure entered my skull like cold water rising. I saw things then that were not memories of my own, stone piled upon stone by hands whose names no history has preserved. Floodwaters covering the ridge and drawing away. Forests growing, forests burning, and then growing again. Creatures passing over the land before men possessed words sufficient to name them. Through all of it, something beneath the soil counted. It did not count years. It did not count seasons. It measured the intervals between disturbances, the spaces between one notice and the next. The bell had interrupted that count every night for 69 years. One sound, the same patient lie. Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet.
Now the creature gathered all those missing nights together. It remembered the whole span at once, the way a drowning man is said to recall his entire life in the final instant before the water closes above him. I never believed that claim. I do believe it now. Silas screamed. He stared into the broken crown of the bell where it stood in the mud. His reflection in the ruined bronze had become a boy of 12 years. The boy raised one hand. Silas raised his own to match it without seeming to choose. The boy smiled. Silas did not. I caught hold of his coat. His whole body pitched forward as though drawn by the reflected face. The bell fragment gave one small note, no louder than a spoon striking carelessly against a glass, and Silas vanished. There was no flash, no violence. One moment his coat remained full and solid in my hands, the weight of him straining against my grip, and the next it was empty. The cloth collapsed into the mud. His lantern struck beside my boot. It remained unlit. I called out his name. No answer came from the road. Mrs. Trosclair called to me from her front porch. I tried to cross the yard. The road lengthened beneath my feet. With every stride, her house drew farther away. The distance stretched as it had upon my return from Verdun, though far worse now. Her windows multiplied as I watched. 4 became 6, and then 6 became 10. In every window stood another version of myself. Some were bent with old age I have not lived to see. Some had hair gone entirely white. One wore the dark coat in which my father was buried. Several had no faces beneath their hairlines, only smooth skin where the features ought to have been. One held up a letter. He began reading aloud. It was this letter. He spoke each sentence a moment before my hand had finished writing it. I know the impossibility of that, but I hear him still. He has just read this line. I turned towards the chapel. Every direction I attempted seemed to lead there in the end, regardless of where I first set out. The chapel interior is no longer the size it ought to be. The aisle continues past the place where the far wall should stand. Pews extend into a darkness without any proper end I can find. People sit within them. Ezekiel Toops is among them. His hair is white, and he is smiling. I did not need Gable's diary to know him. The expression explains why no one in his family spoke of it for 2 generations. A little Trosclair girl sits beside him. Mud dries upon her bare feet. She holds something in her lap, wrapped in old linen. I cannot see what lies within it, though it is long enough to stretch from one knee to the other. Silas sits in the last pew I can make out. He is 12 years old, and I call to him, but he will not turn his face towards me. At the pulpit stands no other than Martha Ansel. I know her, though I have never seen any likeness of her. Her hair hangs loose over one shoulder. Her dress is dark with mud to the waist. She presses one bleeding hand against a bell I cannot properly see, and her lips move steadily. No sound reaches me, but I believe she is still speaking the words she spoke back in 1819. Perhaps she has never stopped. Behind her, something fills the western window. It looks through my reflection at me the way a man looks through dirty glass at someone standing just beyond it. The bell rang once more. The sound came from beneath the ground. One stroke, and it reached me from every direction at once. The walls, the road, the swamp, the soil beneath my feet, the bones within my body. For one blessed instant, the breathing stopped. Every face and every pew turned towards me, every one of them wearing my own. I understand now what Martha Ansel accomplished. I wish I had understood it sooner, I really do, for all the good that such understanding offers me now. The tooth cast into the bronze was not merely something shed by the creature. It was recognition, a part of the whole answering back to itself, the way a man turns when his name is spoken in a crowded room. The bell said,
You are here.
The bell said,
You remain yourself.
The bell said,
This is the same night as before.
Without the bell, the creature reaches outward for another shape by which to recognize itself. A man reaching through darkness for a familiar doorway will settle for whatever wall his hand first finds. But it has settled upon me, because I studied it, because I measured it, because I gave each part of it a name, as I have named the fractures and flaws of 100 other bells without once considering what such attention might cost, because I looked where wiser people kept their eyes lowered. Attention is the door. Memory is the room beyond it. A face, any face, is only the handle a thing without one reaches for. Mrs. Trosclair is calling from somewhere outside the chapel. She tells me to come to her immediately. Another voice beneath the floor repeats the same words in her exact tone. I cannot tell the voices apart. My life may depend upon the difference. Every window in the chapel has gone dark now. Something stands beyond each pane. It's waiting for me to look, but I will not give it that satisfaction. I will finish by touch alone if I must. The bell fragments are moving outside. I hear them scraping across the chapel steps. They have entered through the open door, and they gather beneath the pulpit. They are not joining themselves into a bell. They arrange themselves in a circle. Something lies at the center, long, yellow, wet after all these years beneath the earth. The linen has rotted away. It's a tooth. God help me, it's larger than my forearm. I remember a place beneath this chapel that I have never visited. There are no walls, there is no light, only the pressure of the ridge above and a count that began before I drew my first breath on earth. I feel every soul who has stood upon this ground, every footstep laid down across 70 years, every prayer, every grave opened and covered again, every time the bell rang, and every time it did not. The creature was never beneath Bellerose Hollow alone. Bellerose Hollow rests upon one small corner of it, the way a man's hand rests upon one part of his own body without feeling the whole of himself. Bellerose Hollow rests upon one small corner of it, the way a man's hand rests upon one part of his own body without feeling the whole of himself. And the rest extends beneath the swamp, beneath Verdun perhaps, beneath every road and field beyond any map I have seen, beneath every one of us, wherever we happen to stand. The shape beyond the window has raised its hand. My own hand rises to match it. I cannot lower it. Mrs. Trosclair has stopped calling. I remember the psalm now. At least I remember the words shaped like it. They are not the words my mother taught me, God rest her, wherever she is tonight, and may she be glad not to see what has become of her son.
The Lord is my shepherd.
Something beneath me corrects the sentence before my hand can finish it.
The bell is my shepherd. I shall not wake. It maketh me lie down beneath green waters. It restoreth my
Those are not the words. They were never the words. I know that much still. I know my own name. Amos Elias Pruitt. Amos Pruitt, born near Camden, Arkansas. My mother was Eleanor. My father was Thomas. I am 36 years old this coming winter. I have served the living God through the whole of my working life.
I never doubted that service until tonight.
Even now, I do not doubt God so much as I doubt my own eyes. I came to this ridge carrying a bell. I came here carrying a bell.
I came here carrying.
The figure in the window wears my face entirely now, and it fits better upon it than it has in these last 2 weeks of trying me on. It's smiling. I believe the count is finished. I believe it knows how many nights have passed. All 69 years gathered together in whatever manner such a thing adds. And I believe, gentlemen of the board, with whatever portion of my mind still remains mine, that whatever wakes beneath this ridge does not intend to rise from the ground. It means to rise through us, through whichever of us it can still hold. Something is walking up the aisle behind me. It has taken my step. It matches me stride for stride, though I stand still. It breathes when I breathe, no faster and no slower. It has placed one hand upon my shoulder, gentle as anything, gentle as a father's hand upon a boy who has done something wrong and does not yet understand it. I mean to turn now. I mean to see this through to whatever end waits upon the other side of... The letter ends here. No further correspondence from Reverend Amos Pruitt survives anywhere in the diocesan record. His final letter was recovered without envelope or address among a collection of water-damaged church papers transferred to the diocesan archive in 1907. No accompanying report explains who found it, where it had been kept, or by what means it reached Verdun. The attendance ledger belonging to Gable's Chapel contains no entry after September of 1888. The final, complete page lists 23 members of the congregation. The next page is blank except for a dark circular stain near the lower margin, and one name written faintly in a hand that does not match any other entry in the volume.
Amos Pruitt.
The name was later crossed through. County records list Bellerose Hollow as abandoned by 1891. No relocation of its inhabitants appears in the parish register. No sale of land was recorded. No flood, fire, epidemic, or act of violence was entered against the settlement's name. The county clerk responsible for the notation appears to have found this absence unusual enough to remark upon it in the margin. Population removed or otherwise unaccounted for. He offered no theory as to where they had gone. A survey party entered the basin in 1904 with instructions to relocate the ridge and correct the parish map. The surveyor's report states that the old corduroy road had returned entire to swamp, and that no elevated ground corresponding to the original 1819 plat could be found anywhere in that section of the basin. The party searched for 6 days. They found no chapel, they found no mill, no fieldstone mound. Their surveyor recommended that Bellerose Hollow be removed from all future parish maps. And it was. A second note appears beneath his signature. The ink is darker than the rest of the report. The handwriting belongs to no person identified elsewhere in the file. It reads,
The road is still there after dark.
Well, folks, that's where Reverend Amos Pruitt's final letter ends. Mid-sentence. There were no more letters after that. No church attendance records after October of 1888. By 1891, Bellerose Hollow was listed as abandoned. When a surveyor tried to find the ridge years later, he reported that the road had been reclaimed by the swamp and recommended the place be removed from future maps. Maybe the water swallowed it. Maybe the trees hid it. Or maybe the land beneath Bellerose finally stood up and carried the whole hollow away with it. I keep thinking about Amos. He arrived believing he understood the problem. Sound familiar? The bell was old. The metal was cracked. The tower was unsafe. Replace the failing object, and the danger goes away. That kind of thinking has built most of the world we live in. Find what's broken, remove it, put something newer in its place. But the people of Bellerose weren't trying to preserve a bell. They were preserving a sound. One specific sound, made from silver, bronze, and a piece of whatever slept underneath them. Every night the bell told that thing the same lie. Only one night has passed. Go back to sleep. And it believed that lie for 69 years. Sometimes buying time like that, it costs something mighty fine. I'm starting to understand Reverend Pruitt better than I'd like. He knew the safest thing was to leave the mystery alone. Then it spoke his name. And once a thing speaks to you personally, walking away becomes harder than it ought to be. That didn't come from the story. I think I'm going to have to end the broadcast early. Keep your lights on after this. And should you hear a bell ring somewhere beneath your home, don't go looking for it. A bell doesn't always ring to announce that something has arrived. Sometimes it rings because something is trying very hard to keep what's already there from waking up. This is Jonah. You've been listening to The Midnight Holler, broadcasting from WHAINT Radio, 91.5 on the dial. Stay frosty, friends.
My granddad hauled tobacco up these mountains every fall. He said, boy, don't trust the darkness. Some roads don't end at all. He'd point up toward the ridgeland when the fog was settling in. There's a tower where none should be. Don't you ever stop for it. The red light still burns high above the pines. If you see it after midnight, leave it far behind. Keep your hands upon the wheel. Don't answer if your radio turns. Some folks never made it home. The red light still burns. Old Miss Annie at the diner closed before the sun went down. She'd say truckers kept disappearing north of Jackson Town. One came back without his trail. One came back without his name. One just kept on driving circles, never quite the same. The red light still burns high above the pines. If you hear somebody calling, don't believe it's mine. Roll your windows all the way up, pray the engine starts and turns. Keep your eyes upon the highway. The red light still burns. Others found strange boot prints walking where no man had been. Every step came from the forest, none went back again. Dogs refused to track them, even horses turned around. Every creature knew that mountain better than we found. Some swear they hear old music floating through the cedar trees. Some hear weather reports carried on the evening breeze. Others hear a lonely fella reading letters on the air, like he's talking to somebody who ain't really there. The red light still burns high above the pines. Every lonely midnight broadcast travels farther than the lines. Something listens in the darkness, something waits its turn. Every story finds that tower, the red light still burns. Sheriff closed the county road, state men took the signs away. Maps forgot the mountain, but the tower chose to stay. Ask the oldest folks around here, watch how quiet they become. Some legends ain't forgotten, they're just never spoken of. The red light still burns like it always has before, calling tired travelers toward a weather-beaten door. If your radio starts searching and you hear a calm old voice, keep on blabbing. Some roads only ask you once. The red light still burns.
Her muzzy, my feet look on you.